Hello, good evening, and welcome to Monkeys with Fire. Hope you're all well, having a good week so far, getting ready for the weekend. So tonight we're going to take another look through a role-playing game supplement. Which one are we taking a look at? We are going to explore the fantasy supplement of Godforsaken for the Cypher System from Games. This is a supplement to add fantasy worlds into your role-playing games, be they adapted from other sources or your own creation. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing this book with you this evening. Now, of course, as I always say before we do one of these shows, we will fall into spoiler territory as we start going through the GM section. I will point that out, so if you are a player intending to play something devised from this book, then you might want to stop watching at that point. Of course, GMs, you keep on watching, you get to see all the tools that you might be able to use for an upcoming adventure. Of course, if you do have any questions, please do leave a comment either in the chat or in the feedback following the video, and I will do my best to answer them for you. And of course, must say a huge thank you to Games for providing this copy of Godforsaken for us to take a look at on the channel. All right, then, shall we jump on in? Let's go to the table. So here we go, we do have another one of the Cypher System white books. I really do love the designs of these covers. They're so great. I'm looking forward to each and every one as they come out, as they depict what type of setting the book is for. But let's take a read of the text on the back here. So here we go. Fantasy. Tales of heroes, monsters and magic is arguably the oldest genre of human fiction. It's also the genre that first inspired us to step into imaginary worlds through role-playing games, and it remains the most popular type of RPG setting. Godforsaken takes the Cypher system on a deep dive into the infinite variety of fantasy realms, with rules, character options, gear, and a complete ready-to-use setting that makes the most of the fantasy genre. Whatever fantasy setting you envisage, the Cypher system can take you there. So there we go. Good evening, Roger. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're just getting ready to take a look at Godforsaken. This is a supplement to enhance fantasy games using the Cypher system. As you can see, it is a hard-backed book, and just have a quick look at the back of the page here. It is some 224 pages, give or take a little bit. All right, let's dive on in. Of course, as I have come to expect with the Monty Cook books, there is amazing artwork throughout. Some really good depictions in this book. I've also found it incredibly useful, getting me to think about story writing in fantasy fiction. In fact, I will sort of summarise my thoughts at the end, but I'm getting to the point where no matter what game system you might be playing, if Monty Cook do a supplement book for that theme, I think it's well worth you picking the book up, because they really get you thinking. We've, of course, on the channel, we've looked at a few now, haven't we? We've looked at science fiction, we've looked at superheroes, we've looked at fairy tales, and we have a few more to take a look at, and they are all incredibly useful guides that can create good inspiration for your games. So here we go. Building your fantasy setting, borrowing from other sources. I guess that's the the good thing about fantasy is everybody has probably seen something that you can reference, and that is a hook immediately, isn't it? Once you've got that idea, oh, it's a world like Middle-earth from Lord of the Rings, you're kind of halfway there. And it does say here, using, actually for your game, using a published fantasy game setting, because using these rules you could take something that's already exists and adapt it to the Cypher system. And it's giving a few suggestions here. Seventh Sea, Forgotten Realms, Gods of the Fall, The Lord of the Rings, of course, Numenera, we know that one, Shadow of the Demon Lord, The Strange. So Roger, what was your most inspirational fantasy setting? Something that you've read, or you've watched, or you've played? There's so much to choose from. And of course, Warhammer Fantasy is mentioned. Then it suggests creating a new setting, one of your own design. And it jumps straight away to basically getting you as the games master to think about the role of magic within the world, and basically thinking of a few key points. What's the typical knowledge of magic in the world? What is the power level of that magic? And what is the availability? So these are all things that are worth considering, that can help then form the world around it. I guess, of course, magic, if it was available, would absolutely shape the world, shape the people, wouldn't it? And then from that basis, you've got something to work from as far as creating the rest of your world. So it talks a little bit about the history of your fantasy realm. Should we call it a realm? Again, you know, creating some of this history could actually be what you really enjoy. You know, maybe as a GM you could spend hours and hours writing lots of backstory about all the different locations that your players might go to. There again, you might want to just have an action-orientated adventure, and the backstory is not that relevant. What's more pressing is maybe the dungeon that you are exploring, the adversaries you might meet. D&D was your first, and in the Conan movies, yes, Beastmaster, Sword and Sorcerer, Excalibur, yes, yeah, absolutely. Those are good ones. For me, I go down a typical route. It was reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time. That was my very, very first introduction. And then from there was Dungeons and Dragons, of course. But there have been obviously so many different fantasy worlds since, in movies. I suppose more in games. I guess my top one now might be the likes of Skyrim. That was a great game to play. I very much was invested in that world at the time. So setting a paradigm, be that arcane versus divine, classical Greek elements, elves versus dwarves, the 5 elements, or shadow versus light. Posing the question, is death permanent in this fantasy realm, or can people be brought back? And then this again is another area, gets a little bit of attention, map making. I think I would very much enjoy that element. Again, my copy of The Lord of the Rings had, of course, Middle-earth all depicted folding out as a map, and I thought that was amazing. So being able to create your own maps of your fantasy kingdom, I think that's got a lot of fun within this sort of fantasy setting, isn't it? So then it talks about advising players about the setting, and I thought this was interesting because it breaks it down into 4 simple categories: the location, the time period, the awareness of magic, and a belief in the reality of magic. So it does give some examples here, and I thought this was quite good. Location examples, so maybe fantasy Europe, fantasy New York, generic medieval fantasy world, Middle Earth. Okay, so then time periods, and it really does go through the entirety of history here. So Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Roman Empire, European Middle Ages, Elizabethan era, American colonial period, American Revolution, American Civil War, Gilded Age, World War I, Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, which is the Lovecraftian era, World War II, 1950s, 1970s, 1980s, modern day internet age, near future within 30 years, far future 100 or more years, distant future 1000 or more years. I guess that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because just because your fantasy setting, you instantly jump to the idea of maybe elves and dwarves, but in what time period, you know, is, well, I suppose you would consider Shadowrun could be fantasy because of the inclusion of those types of races, but it's kind of sci-fi in there as well. Maybe that one kind of has a foot in each camp a little bit. But it was interesting that it went all the way into the far future. But then, magical awareness. So, non-existent, basic. Most people are familiar with the idea of magic and dragons, but couldn't explain the difference between an enchanter or necromancer. Informed. People know about magic and related elements, such as banshees and curses. Or high. People can name a few famous spells and monsters as easily as they can name celebrities or popular songs. So, Roger, if you were creating a fantasy world, what level of magical awareness might they have? Non-existent, informed, or high awareness? How much magic would you want in your world? And then magic reality. Denied, there is no believable evidence that magic exists. Suspected, there's enough indirect evidence that most people believe it exists and it is real. And then absolute. Everybody believes magic is as real as trees and humans. Again, I suppose that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a little bit maybe like the Force in Star Wars. There is a time where everybody believed of the Force, and then it became folklore, and only a few still believed in it. Would John Carter be fantasy in the future? I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if we can, as we go through this, let's see if it touches upon it, because it does name drop a load of references to help you try and to visualize. So magic would be people know about it, but only a few can access it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably a good balance, isn't it? You kind of want it special. Because if everybody has it, then I suppose it isn't anymore. Granted, that would cause a very chaotic world, wouldn't it? So chapter 2 is looking at fantasy plots. Creating your plot. And then give some examples of some sample fantasy plots. Betrayal or family troubles. Rebellion or a mystery or revenge. Lots of ideas. And then suggestions on the fantasy character option. So this, of course, is giving you an idea how to create certain types of characters using the Cypher system. Again, okay, Roger, what type of character would you create? Now, regulars on the channel will know that I typically always go for the ranger character. So let's just take a look here. Rangers mix combat and skills, and therefore are usually explorers, perhaps with a combat flavour, or warriors, perhaps with skills and knowledge flavour. Appropriate foci for a ranger are controls beasts, hunts, lives in the wilderness, slays monsters, throws with deadly accuracy and wields 2 weapons at once. So I think I would go with an explorer with combat flavour. I think that's what I would go for. And as for a couple of foci, I'd like the idea of the wields 2 weapons. And of course we've got to have something in terms of, lives in the wilderness. We've got to have that. Roger, you'd go for the ranger as well. Yeah, I thought you might. But of course there's a whole selection here. Warlocks or witches, tricksters or con artists, rogues or thieves, sorcerers, monks or martial artists, paladins, druids, inquisitors, clerics or priests. So again, if you're familiar with these types of character class in other games, you can take a look at this section and find the appropriate alternative for the Cypher system. We then have a variety of new foci that are of course flavoured more towards fantasy. As the book points out, the core rulebook has over 100 different foci, but some of those are suitable for maybe modern day settings or sci-fi settings. So this book is very much focused on the fantasy elements and adding more to that mix. But it does explain that with a little bit of rejigging, many of those foci that you think are for a modern day setting can be turned into a fantasy setting. But here we go, it gives some examples. So takes animals' shape, uses wild magic, walks the wild woods, wields an enchanted weapon. And so here we go, it does talk about making foci fantastic. So battles robots. You battle a dangerous kind of creature such as demons, golems or undead. Abilities like tech skills give training in skills like magical lore or religion instead of computers and vehicles. Or builds robots. You create golems or other animated things out of inanimate materials. So, as it says, you can change modern into fantasy quite easily. Selection of new abilities. And again, I always find it very, very handy. There is reference points in the margins on every page that either tells you to go and check pages in the Cypher System core book or referencing future pages in this book. There is the PDF version of this, so these are all hyperlinked, so you can jump from page to page with ease. Got lots of additional options here. Moving on to equipment. Working out the value of money within your world. And then taking a look at different weapons, light weapons, medium weapons, heavy weapons. I think, of course, we will have to have some kind of bow. So what have we got? I don't want a crossbow. I prefer... Yeah, there we go. We got a bow with some arrows. A bow costs 30 gold pieces. Extortionate. What type of weapons might you have? I assume you'd go for a bow as well, being a ranger. But I like the idea, maybe. Maybe a quarterstaff or something like that. Oh, a bow, a sword, and a dagger. A dagger will set you back 2 gold pieces and can be thrown to short range. So we got a few examples there. We have some descriptions. We got some random weapon tables. Where you know how I like my tables. Armor descriptions. I feel like I'm probably in maybe a leather jerkin. I can't see my ranger wearing any heavy armor. variety of different adventuring gear. Again, as we've discussed with looking through these white books, I love all the little art just dotted around here, and it's always of a very, very high standard. Okay, so we got a reasonable amount there, just looking through the different weapons, armor, and clothing. Look at that orc, isn't he awesome? I like him, he's good. Studded leather if available, but nothing heavier than leather. Yeah, I agree, I agree. So here we go, Chapter 5, Fantasy Gaming Inspiration. Again, this is the things that I found really useful reading through. So here we go. High fantasy. So magic is common and well-known thing, even if practicing is limited to a small subset of the population. The stories and adventures often have an epic and world-affecting scope. The setting often has intelligent fantasy species and cultures like elves, dwarves and trolls, also known as epic fantasy. So of course, this is the Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia and the Discworld series. There's a whole list here. My goodness, it's like, how many of these have you read or seen? We got the Neverending Story, the Wheel of Time series, the Shannara series. I remember reading one of those. Avatar: The Last Airbender. There goes a few notable ones. Low fantasy, a more subdued counterpart of high fantasy with an Earth-like setting, medieval, antiquity, or corresponding to some other historical time period. Magic exists, but isn't necessarily something the heroes wield directly or easily. And it says the PCs tend to be martial focused, warriors or thieves. The magic they use tends to be in objects. So sword and sorcery is part of this genre. So here we go. We got the Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard. Red Sonja. Dragon Slayer. Willow. Beastmaster. A Song of Ice and Fire. That's a little known book. Maybe one day we'll get the ending. Okay. So yeah, sword and sorcery. Alright, dark fantasy. A gloomier setting than high fantasy, usually with darker elements or a sense of horror and dread. So, what are the examples? The Sandman comic series from Neil Gaiman. The Dark Tower from Stephen King. I'm trying to think, see of other... There's got quite a few, and again, what's good about this is if you were interested, here's some references for you to basically go and check out those books. So I really do appreciate this. Dying Earth. The setting is in the end of times of its existence, either as a planet or an entire dimension, when natural laws begin to fail, which may explain the existence of magic in the setting, or why magic is starting to fail. So, examples include The Dying Earth by Jack Vance, The Magic Goes Away by Larry Niven. I haven't heard those. Fairy tales, so folk narratives, beast fables and moral lessons presented as entertainment. So the goals of a fairy tale story or RPG often diverge from those of a fantasy RPG. For example, it's typical for a fantasy campaign to feature the same characters going on many adventures, whereas fairy tales often end just after one, with the heroes living happily ever after. So, of course, it talks about Jack and the Beanstalk, Robin Hood, Alice in Wonderland, and of course then the Brothers Grimm and Pan's Labyrinth. And of course, if it was fairy tale, then there is a fairy tale specific supplement book by Monty Cook Games that you could go and check out, which has loads of great information on just that one small section. And we did do a video of that last year, so you can go and check that out. Historical fantasy, Earth in a historical period with the addition of magic. So The Princess Bride, Knights of the Round Table, Sinbad, of course, Xena, Warrior Princess, Clash of the Titans, Time Bandits. I wonder, would the Golden Compass fall into historical fantasy? That series of books, and of course then the TV series and movie. Contemporary fantasy, a fantasy version of Earth set in a time period it was created. Magic may be a secret or out in the open. So this is the Dresden Files. Oh, Harry Potter, The Magicians, yeah, Hellboy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural. Okay. Hercules would get into the historical fantasy, wouldn't it? Yes, great TV series. Paranormal romance, usually a historical or modern Earth with stories focusing on characters, romantic love and relationships with supernatural creatures such as vampires or ghosts. So again, Buffy, the Twilight Saga. Yeah. Whimsical fantasy, a more light-hearted look at the fantasy genre. So Discworld, Good Omens, Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth. And then I'm going to mess this one up. You know how badly I am with some words. It's a Chinese word. I want to say it's wuxia. I'm getting it wrong. I apologize to all of China. Wuxia. I can't do the XIA part. That's the problem. But semi-historical adventures in a fantasy historical China, usually within martial heroes as the protagonists. Magic, swords, impossible fighting techniques, curses and ghosts are common elements. I like this because it is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, The House of the Flying Daggers, The Forbidden Kingdom. And there was a series, I suppose this is probably a little bit more, not modern day, I suppose, but it was Into the Badlands that had all the amazing fighting sequences. I thought that was a really, really cool series. Really enjoyed it. But I think that would be a cool setting. That would be really, really good. You'd have a lot of fun with it. So, moving on. Magical rules. So this is all about incorporating magic into your games. There is a lot to that. We'll skip through because there is a lot of detail going through. Then lots of different spells, magical technology, and technology that interacts with magic. And then talking about secret and true names and wishes. Again, this is what amazes me about these Cypher System white books. They cover everything. It is really worth sitting down and just reading through them. Talking about treasure. And then manifest ciphers. Artifacts. Talking about dungeons and castles and walls. Doors. Traps. Triggered traps and finding traps. And then there's a whole variety of information here. So disabling, damaging and bypassing traps. And then different kinds of traps. Because of course that's one of the fun things about exploring dungeons, isn't it? Is setting up a whole host of different traps to basically kill unwary adventurers. We got arrows. We got disintegration, crushing walls, poison gas, a flooding room, poison needles, a slicing blade, that's a little bit Indiana Jones, a snake pit. So, good selection of traps there to include. We then go on to fantasy species. Catfolk, dragonfolk, I'm starting to see a lot more catfolk appearing in some games. Gnomes, halflings, lizard folk. So this is dealing with some of the races that are not included in the core book. They pretty much do cover the main ones, don't they? So orcs and dwarves and elves, to a little bit of detail in the section. So this is for the GM, so I'm going to go back past this real quick. It's a few little examples of little adventures you could go on. In fact, actually, I should just put this in here now. So if you are a player, you might not want to be watching this part as we start going through the area for the GM. You have been warned. Alright, let's carry on. So here we go. Creatures and NPCs. And there is a lot. There's a lot here. So, what do we have? We got a basilisk. This is where I really love all this artwork. This artwork is great. Blackguard. Cambion. What's a cambion? Ah, that's interesting. Are you familiar with this kind of creature, Roger? Corrupt mage, cyclops, a demon lord, air elemental, fawn elemental, water elemental, evil priests, a fairy, gorgon. We can bring in some Greek mythology into this. A hag, harpies and hollow knights, hydra. So here we go. I'm going to get this wrong, of course, but Jotun. So this is Norse giants. So a Norse fire giant and a frost giant. Motive, destruction, hungers for flesh and honor. Hungers for flesh. A lich, manticore and merfolk, minotaur, morlocks, necromancers and noble knights. Sapient tree. That's a tree beard, isn't it? Satyr, shadow, soul eater, a sphinx and a troll, worm but walks, and a wraith, and a wyron. And then we have NPCs. We've got a bard, berserkers and druids and dwarves and elves, halflings and paladins and thieves. So there's quite a lot there, and I will tease you that we will be taking a look in the coming weeks at the newly released Cypher System Bestiary, and wow, okay, it is amazing. So this collection of creatures and NPCs that they include in that book, absolutely phenomenal. You're going to really enjoy taking a look at that one. So if you recall how the Cypher system works, and I want to just get this correct here. So the Cypher System Rulebook assumes that subtle ciphers are the default, but in the fantasy game the assumption is usually the opposite. Ciphers are physical objects with magical powers which the hero find as treasure, gifts or rewards. Okay, so what we're going to get is, so manifest, I don't want to get this right. There is two kinds, isn't there? And I did find this before, because we have manifest and subtle. So it's, I think it's the subtle ciphers are objects with magical abilities, and manifest ciphers are just good luck and blessings from the gods. I think that's how it works. Hopefully I've got that right. I did find a page where it did tell me that. So, what type of things might we find? A book with words of power, crystal, a tattoo or a charm. And there's a variety. Then different things here. Dragon wand. And then we have artifacts. So we have a whole variety here. Adamantine rope, alchemist bag, book of all spells, crown of eyes, demonic rune blade. Can't go wrong with that. Gloves of agility. So again, just plenty of suggestions. So that is all of part one. This is everything you might hope for creating your own fantasy setting, including creatures and NPCs, including various magical items or just normal items as well, but obviously all within the Cypher system. But if you don't want to create something yourself, then the book also includes an entire setting. It's where the designers have done all the work for you. Now, again, if you are a player, you absolutely would not want to be looking at this section of the video, because this is very much, put it up, lots of spoilers. Okay, so stop watching now. You potentially do ruin this fantastic fantasy world to explore. But for everybody else, indeed, there is a lot of stuff in part one, Rogue, you're quite right. So this is where they have created a unique fantasy land, and they cover everything. And what I really, really like is, so we have the name of the land, and I was going to say Bonfaire, Bonfaire, the blessed land. And then I noticed down here in the margin, pronunciation, it's Bonfaire, Bonfaire. T-H-A-Y-R, Bonfaire, Bonfaire. So even people like me can say the name of this land correctly. And I love it. But we have maps, which is great. It goes through all these different regions, telling you all a little bit about each region. And there is just so much detail. And the good thing about this, of course, is that you could use this as a template. You've had all the guidance in part one. Now you can see that guidance being put to use, creating this unique land. So use this, follow a similar format, create your own. But then we have a section now talking about the different characters that are in this fantasy kingdom. And again, we were not going to focus in too much on it, but I just want you to sort of appreciate just how much detail they've gone into on this. It's a great read. We then start to zoom on in a little bit about the lands in Godforsaken, making it focusing a little bit more on the detail. And then this is actually looking at the different regions. So if I get this correct, so Levame, let's say that, and let me just go back to the map at the beginning. So I can sort of highlight this. I hope I'm correct. Yep, there we go. So this is the region, Flevem. This is off to this side. So this is one region. And then off to the side of it, here it is, we have this region. So we can see just a little bit of the green just here. So it just goes to show, so there's multiple regions in this land. It's not just one area, it's multiple. And this of course has a slightly different theme to it. Again, we won't focus in too much. We then have another area. So, you know, just credit to them. There's just so much detail here. And then we have a fourth area to explore. And this is giving the Games Master so much information about each of these regions. Because ultimately, once all of that information has been sort of consumed and processed, we then have part 3, a couple of adventures. And this is for your players to basically go on and adventure in the lands that we've just explored. So the first and a second adventure. And that is basically it. As I said near the beginning, I really am appreciating the value of these supplements for the Cypher system by Monty Cook Games and the benefits that they present for other game systems, where getting you to sort of think along the lines of, okay, if I'm going to create my campaign or if I want to create a brand new world, it has a lot of good points to think about, all contained within the book, and I really do appreciate that. I think they're incredibly well put together, and as I say, I'm looking forward to the next book that we will be able to take a look at. So with that in mind, next week we are going to be taking, we're going to be heading to the future a little bit, hopefully the distant future, very relevant to what you might be watching on TV. So, oh, is that going to work? There we go. We are going into the wasteland, the apocalyptic wasteland of Fallout. You may have been watching it on TV, the Fallout TV series. So we're going to take a look at the Wanderer's Guidebook, Scavenging Within the Wasteland. So we'll be doing that on Tuesday, but then on Thursday we're going to keep with our apocalyptic theme, because we will be taking a look then at Monty Cook Games Cypher System Supplement, Rust and Redemption. So this is the white book for creating post-apocalyptic settings for the Cypher system. And wow, it is a great book. There's some really, really cool information in there. So I think you're going to really enjoy it. So it is definitely an apocalyptic themed week next week. Hope you'll be able to join me for that. As I say, if you do have any questions about Godforsaken, please leave a comment in the chat. Let me know if this is the type of things you like to look at, or if there will be other books you want me to take a view on. Then I'll try and do my best for those. But I guess until then, have a wonderful weekend and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.